All right, everybody, we are done with our project. And if you are anything like me, you need a little time away from projects when you're done with a major one like we just did. So we're going to move on to something a little more traditional for Chapter 6, which is the economic side of 1450 to 1750, whereas Chapter 5 was the political side of 1450 to 1750. And I'm fully aware that some of you have never taken economics and some of you have, and some of you might need a refresher. Now, these three economic terms you will learn about day in, day out for Chapter 6. So I need you to know these, and hopefully by the end of this chapter, you understand these three terms backwards, forwards, and sideways. I'm guessing you will. Now, the first term is a commodity, which is a raw material or primary agricultural product that can be bought and sold, or a useful or valuable thing like water or time. Are commodities. Okay, mercantilism. It's an economic system of trade that was based on the idea that a nation's wealth and power were best served by increasing exports, and so involved increasing trade. And what this means in application was during this time period, a ton of people got aboard these big boats and traveled all over the world to push their goods into markets, whether the people wanted them or not. And a real simple economic equation: if I sell a ton and don't buy a whole lot, I'm going to get rich. And that's kind of the root of mercantilism and coerced labor, which is work a person does for another person or the state under coercion or compulsion, and they receive little or no compensation. And yes, we're talking about slavery. So this is the very unpleasant side of this era. So we will learn about all three of those things throughout Chapter 6. But I posed an economic question. I just think it's an interesting question. I wanted you to guess what commodities are the most lucrative today. In other words, what commodities are going to produce a lot of money? And when people think economically, they think elastic versus inelastic, need versus want. In other words, profit margin. What business is that? Big profit margins. What can I do to sell internationally? Logically, I'm going to sell a lot more to the world than a little section of the world. What are some applications for the commodities that people need, the supply and demand? And here's a question: what are the rich people doing to get rich? Outside of celebrities and professional athletes, which unfortunately young people seem to think is the only way to get rich. That's not true. There's other ways to get rich. And, if you're inclined to make a lot of dough, how can you get a piece of the action? So these are questions that people were discussing and thinking about as we came up with your guesses. But in reality, the top 10 most traded commodities as of making this presentation, and it might change over time, likely, but there's no surprises, at least to me. Oil and gas, need to power our stuff. We have gold and silver, that's always been a big deal. And then some staple crops, wheat we make our bread with, and cotton we make our clothes out of. No surprises there. Now, a little more of a challenging thought exercise. I asked you to go back in time to these years 1450 to 1750, and same question. What would you guess the top 10 commodities were? But this thinking is all the same, but the world was a little bit different. The thinking's the same, the world's different. So to give you a little idea, now even before 1450 to 1750, the early era, the first era, and even before that, this Silk Road world, this Trans-Saharan Trade Network world, this Indian Ocean Trade Network. Now, bearing in mind, this is an Afro-Eurasia. And you can see the Silk Road, and you can see the Indian Ocean Trade Network, and you can see the Trans-Saharan Trade Network. Now, some of these commodities are still big money. Grain. People need to eat. It doesn't matter if it's 1,000 years ago or 1,000 years from now, people need to eat. Some of these commodities have dated. Rhinoceros horn and tortoiseshell, not the demand now what it used to be. But that's a little tip of the hat to the past. But this is the era we're talking about now, 1450 to 1750. And if you look at these commodities, you go to any grocery store, the majority of these items will be there for sale, and they're big money items, all big industries around each and every one of these commodities. But what happened is in 1492, when Columbus arrived, what this opened up was this era where commodities from the Eastern Hemisphere went to the Western Hemisphere, and commodities from the Western Hemisphere went to the Eastern Hemisphere. Now, a lot of you are looking at this skull and crossbone because it sticks out. These diseases we're going to address separately. For today's class, I want you to focus on just these commodities. Pick one that's your favorite because we're going to go a little deeper about it. Now, if you missed class, I want you to watch this video. Now, we watched it in class, and this is a word from my favorite professor I've ever had from University of Michigan, where he gives a brief talk about the history of coffee and how it connects. So this is for the absent people. Please watch this. It's on Google Classroom if you don't want to watch this embedded video, but it will give you some perspective. And it's an important 3 minutes for my absent people. Now, here's the assignment. Whether you were in class or whether you're absent, pick one of these commodities. Not diseases, one of these commodities. Hey, I like bananas. Pick bananas. Hey, I like the rich taste of cigarettes. I hope not. But pick tobacco. I don't care. Hey, I like peanut butter, even though you can't have it in school because kids have allergies. Pick any commodity. It's unimportant. And what I'm going to ask you to do is look at your commodity, research this commodity, and go a little deeper. And I'm going to ask you to create an SAQ, a simple SAQ. It's only the second one we're doing, but I want to reiterate that SAQ format. T, your topic sentence, your evidence, your analysis. And I want you to identify one economic ramification of your commodity globally, meaning how did your one commodity affect the money-making capability of the world? The second part of it is identify one humanitarian ramification of your commodity on a global scale. This is a little more difficult, but you can guess at the time, especially during this Columbian exchange, these commodities were being, I don't want to say processed or grown, processed by coerced labor, by slaves. So that's the cruelest thing you can do to a person. So on a humanitarian level, probably wasn't helpful. At the same time, some of these items might heal people or be positive to the world or provide nutrients to a region of the world. So it could be positive in that respect. And then environmental ramifications. Some of these commodities don't harm the environment very much. Some do. But I want you to look at this, and the main point of the SAQ is this final slide, that any commodity, past or present, should be viewed through three lenses. That any new commodity or any commodity has an economic effect, an environmental effect, and a humanitarian effect. And every commodity has its own story. From that Bob Bain video, you will see coffee's brief story, and you will see its economic ramifications, humanitarian ramifications, and environmental ramifications. So, hopefully you understand the basics of these economic terms, and that this unit is a positive, and I look forward to working with you during this chapter, and thank you for watching.